This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The hierarchy of the heavenly realm. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is our monthly Iron and Myth program. We are back with a new program after several weeks of rebroadcasts. Basically pulled programs from the archives from the early days of our experiments with video here on A View from the Bunker to cover the time that we were away in Israel. Now we're back. Brought with me a little bit of a virus, as you can hear. Still fighting it off, me and the neti pot, and we will prevail, God willing. Joining us to engage in a discussion that has really been the focus of study by learned men and women, scholars who have studied the scriptures and the spirit realm for literally the last 2 millennia, at least as far as Christians are concerned. The pastor of Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado in Boulder, and our recent guest on our tour of Israel, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, best-selling author and screenwriter Brian Godawa, and the director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, Dr. Judd Burton. Gentlemen, welcome. This is a subject that has fascinated Christians, well, people of all religious faiths, really, for millennia. You know, what do we make of the spirit realm? Who's in it? And what do they look like? What are their powers? What do they think about us? How do they interact with us? And is there a hierarchy? Is there like an org chart that can be developed for the spirit realm? Honestly, Doug, let me throw this to you as the pastor here. What is there in Scripture? I mean, what kind of clues can we get from the Bible as to the nature of the spirit realm?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think a lot of people think that it's not that organized and that there is no real hierarchy. I mean, they really think of demons and angels, and that's kind of about it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even the whole idea of the sons of God, for a lot of people, that threw us for a loop and kind of opens up the door for being able to think about other kinds of things. I kind of look at it as in the other world, there's two kinds of beings. There's the human dead and there's the non-human dead. And I suppose the human dead is maybe something we could talk about at another time. But the non-human dead would have to include things like the spirits of the Rephaim, where they went into the underworld, sons of God and watchers and those kinds of things. And then you get to the New Testament. There's some things in the Old Testament. I think the book of Daniel is very helpful as a preliminary book for what's going on with Paul. But he starts talking about things in several lists in Romans and Galatians and stuff, Ephesians, that, reading them before I ever came to this worldview, I had no idea what he was talking about. He talks about thrones, powers, principalities, and rulers, and all these kinds of things. And it's like, what in the world? And, so I think that those kinds of lists are starting to get at, I don't know if it's necessarily a hierarchy, but it certainly is telling us about creatures that are on the other side that we don't think very often about. And like I said, I think Daniel is kind of a root for at least some of those, because the archons, usually translated as rulers, that's what the Septuagint gives us for, like, the Prince of Persia, the Prince of Greece, are these archons. And then you also have in Daniel the thrones. You'll see Paul referencing these thrones. It's like, what are those? Well, that comes from Daniel 7, where these thrones are set up in this great throne room of heaven, and the Ancient of Days is there. And so it's almost like thrones are personified as some sort of beings that are, whether they're divine council, whether they're the watchers or somebody else, I don't know. But I think that we do start to get hints of those kinds of things in the Scripture.
Brian, you've done a lot of digging into this for your series, the Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Watchers, Chronicles of the Apocalypse. That required an awful lot of research. What did you find?
Yeah, there's a couple of components. Of course, in the research, I looked at the Canaanite or Ugaritic. I don't know, how do you say that? Ugaritic or Ugaritic?
I've heard it both ways.
Yeah. I like Ugaritic. That's fine. Anyway, so the closest thing we have to finding a sort of, well, first of all, the ancient Near East did tend to have hierarchies, but the one closest to Israel, of course, Canaan, and the Ugaritic texts, and there you'll read the scholarship on there, and they basically say that, and they do it in comparison with the Hebrew hierarchy, heavenly hierarchy, and they basically say that there's 4 levels, 4 tiers of hierarchy in the Ugaritic, the Canaanite. And that is, at the top you have the supreme god or gods. And because this would be, of course, relevant to not just one single nation, but many nations had these varieties, But you've got, and those tend to be like in Canaan, it would be El, and they tend to be more of a figurehead, not as active, And then the second level would be the active gods, like you may have things like Baal and Asherah and such. And then the third level would be and these aren't as popular or common, and that would be the craftsman gods. And the classic case of that is Kotar Wahesis, who was this divine being that made the Baal's hammer and spear, and then the last level is the messengers, which is, be the equivalent of malakim, in Hebrew Bible. But what Old Testament scholars tend to they find that a commonality there, but they tend to sort of say, well, the Hebrew hierarchy is more like only 3 levels. No, so you've got Yahweh at the top, and he's the supreme God, of course, and he is the creator, etc. And then you've got the mid-level, which would be like the heavenly host, the sons of God, those who surround God's throne. And in that would also be included cherubim and seraphim, which we can talk about, of course. And then the lowest level would be the malakim or messengers. And yet even within that that basic hierarchy, which is pretty loose, because obviously there are, the angel of Yahweh is a messenger, but in general, it's like there are these messengers type beings, and that we would usually call angels, right? But and then sometimes they interact within the different levels. But the several passages that deal with that. What is the Kings passage? I always forget that. Is it 1 Kings or 2 Kings?
The 1 Kings.
1 Kings 22. So that's a good passage where it describes, the prophet sees the vision of God's heavenly throne, and it literally describes that, Yahweh is surrounded by his heavenly host, which is a council, and he deliberates with them, and he asks them questions, and he interacts with them. So that's that mid-level heavenly host realm where those are beings, divine beings, who actually interact and counsel with God, and then, and then they give a deliberation, and they give the messenger the task to do, and a messenger goes and does it. That's sort of the basic paradigm that I think most people see when you're reading the text. And I think we can talk about some of these distinctions, like the angel of Yahweh, which would be Doug's purview there. I know, and then the seraphim and the cherubim. Who are they? Because they're throne guardians who tend to guard the sacred, the presence of the sacred, or they operate as a kind of a not a doorway, but a gateway through which you can access the sacred, that kind of a thing. So that's why you'll see throne guardians around kings or around gods in engravings and such like that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the sort of the big paradigm picture. There's a lot of little details, but that's kind of what I found.
Yeah. Judd,
one last thing. And then, of course, which we've talked a lot here, is the Watchers or the, as you said, the prince. So the princes of the nations are that notion of territorial powers who are over spiritual authorities connected to the earthly authorities. Sometimes they're connected to kings, sometimes they're connected to cities, and oftentimes they're connected to nations, at least in the biblical text. And in Daniel, you see they are connected to nations, Persia, Greece. So those are territorial authorities and powers, but those would be, I don't know at what level those would be considered, but that's also another tier of authority, I think.
Jed, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the that the hierarchy issue is also married to an issue of taxonomy, and this is one that that scholars of many make and model have applied their talents to. I think that this comparative approach that Brian references has a lot of merit to it, but of course it goes just beyond the Near Eastern models. There, in anthropology and comparative religion, there have been scholars like Andrew Lang and Wilhelm Schmidt who have tried to make these sort of analogical comparisons. That being said, I think that one of the interesting things about fleshing out the hierarchy and the taxonomy is that we almost, in the day and age which we live in, particularly if you subscribe to a biblical worldview, we've almost got a kind of laboratory setting in which to better understand, almost in real time, the different kinds of manifestations within this hierarchy, within this taxonomy. And I'm, of course, referencing about all of the paranormal phenomena that we're witness to in the world today. So if I could bring that discussion full circle and perhaps even broader across time and space, I think that these are relevant issues to tackle, not only from the theological perspective and the sort of bare bones lay perspective, but also kind of from the anthropological perspective. And again, these models, I think, can go a long way towards perhaps even adding some detail and minutia to what that taxonomy, what that hierarchy looks like.
Just to throw this out here, I think because of Daniel chapter 4 and the reference to the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, where Nebuchadnezzar sees watchers descending and decreeing a punishment on him, and mentioning in that passage that, let's see, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven, verse 17. The sentence is by decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones. So it would seem that they were granted some authority by God to actually administer some of his creation. It's almost like we don't see it. We don't get the backstory like we do in 1 Kings 22, where God throws the question open to the floor. How are we going to deceive Ahab? You can imagine that perhaps there was a question, or maybe a directive from God. Say, hey, Nebuchadnezzar's a real jerk. So what are we going to do? And the watchers decide on his punishment. We don't see that sort of authority given to the cherubim or the seraphim, the throne guardians. So could we assume that perhaps a watcher class entity would be of a higher rank in the heavenly realm?
Well, they're at least of a rank of making judgments and deliberating over things. So it could be an office, I suppose, that they hold. That's one of the tough things about this for me, is that a lot of these words are more functional than they are ontological. Mm-hmm. So, when you're talking about a hierarchy, are we talking about just purely some entity as it's existing in the realm of its function, what it's doing? Or are we talking about something that's actually, like man is higher than beasts or something like that? Those might be two different kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, we wouldn't see, say, one of the malakim coming down and saying, the malakim have decided, Nebuchadnezzar, that you're going to go crazy for 7 years. Now, we don't know that.
Again, to me, that's the question, though, is that a malakim, if it's really just referring to a function, then it could be some kind of, you could have all kinds of different kinds of ontological creatures, right? So, Brian brought up the angel of the Lord. In my estimation, he's the highest of the high because he's Christ himself. But he's functioning as an angel. So when he comes and he's called the angel of the Lord, he's the messenger of the covenant. Mm-hmm. And so it's not necessarily telling us about who he is at that moment. You gotta go to other places to find that out. So could an angel be somebody who's high up in authority in another way, but God sends him like the angel Gabriel or Raphael, the four kind of archangels or whatever that you have in Roman Catholicism, that kind of thing. Are they super high up, or are they just angels? Well, I don't know that we have to pick. I don't know that it's an either or.
So in other words, you might get one of the Seraphim or one of the malakim who has been designated a watcher. In other words, like in the army, you've got a whole bunch of soldiers, but you've only got a few generals.
I tend to think that that's probably the way that it works, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about it.
I don't see why not. I mean, one of the things that I always go back to is just, like Doug referenced a moment ago, that it's just drilling it back down to the language. If these are functionary titles, then it would seem that a number of tiers of angelic beings would be able to fill them. So you may be looking at a title that's specific to an assignment rather than just a general rank.
So I think that the word angel it's a really interesting word. Ron Johnson, in his dissertation on thrones and powers, has a little section on kind of the way that the word angel changed over time. And I think that he's spot on that at some point in time, by the time you get to the New Testament, angel really came to replace the word God, a little g gods. Whereas when you're looking in the Old Testament, angel is very clearly a messenger. And, I think that we do that in our own vocabulary today. Whenever I have somebody that's really struggling with the idea of other Elohim, I said, well, just don't put that aside. Take that off the table for a minute and just think about angels. You believe in those, right?
Yeah.
So if it's helpful for you to think of these creatures as angels, well, we're not off base to do that, because it's literally the way that the Septuagint talks about them. So, maybe another example would be helpful. And this is my own speculation. When I wrote the Angels of the Lord book with my pastor friend Matt, he takes a kind of a different view of Michael. But in my estimation, Michael, who is called the Prince of Israel, okay, your prince. So that's Daniel chapter 12. I believe that Michael is the proper name of the angel of the Lord. It just means who is like God. And so if that's true, then what we have is a prince of a nation who is also being called an angel. So right there, Derek, is kind of, you brought up the question of a watcher and an angel. I think that could very well be the case, that, in his function on the divine council in the Old Testament, this person, the figure, the angel of the Lord, is one of the gods of the nations. But the stunning thing in Daniel 7 is that all of a sudden he, using different language, because he's one like a son of a man, and all, everybody in the whole throne room is like, what's going on here? Who's this one like a son of a man coming to the Ancient of Days? Well, if that's the angel of the Lord, if it's Michael, if there's something going on with that, we need to really wrestle with what these words are meaning, what they're conveying, and not just assume that an angel is a kind of a being, and that watchers are a different kind of a being, because there might be overlap there.
Yeah. So, Doug, can you give the arguments for why you think Daniel is equated with the angel of Yahweh or Jesus?
Why Michael is?
Yeah, I've heard of that, but I've not looked into the argument.
Yeah. So there's a couple different lines of it that I go to. So the first one is that there's a prince over Israel. Okay, that's right, called Michael in Daniel 12. All right.
Right.
But in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, this is the passage where God gives the nations to the son according to the number of the sons of God, right? So the Most High is doing this to the number of the sons of God. And then the next verse says, but the Lord's portion is Jacob, and Israel is his inheritance. And so my estimation is that that has to be the son there. It has to be, because fathers don't inherit things, and he's just been talking about the sons of God. So if that's the case, and the 70 are given to the nations, and those are the watchers, right? Then the Lord has to be the watcher over Israel. He's the prince of Israel. And so Deuteronomy 32:9 and Daniel 12:1 have to be read together, because unless there's two princes of Israel, they have to be the same person. And in that case, he's obviously just called Yahweh, but in other places, when he's the angel of the Lord, he starts saying things like, I covenanted with you to your fathers. I picked Abraham and brought him out of, Babylon. I made a covenant with him. He tells the people in Judges, you did not obey my voice. And it's very clearly in those passages, he's the angel of the Lord there. So, you kind of have to do some navigating of various texts and read them together. And when you do that, I just don't know what other conclusion you can come to than that.
Interesting.
But I know people disagree.
Now, ontologically speaking, there have to be some differences between some of the members of the spirit realm. I mean, when we look at the description of the cherubim, or cherubim for you Hebrew speakers, in Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, and the seraphim in Isaiah chapter 6, clearly those are different types of entities. And then we get into the malakim, which appear to be human, at least the way they're described in the few places they appear in the Old Testament. And then you've got the ophanim, which are the wheels with eyes all around, and the spirit of the living creatures is in them in Ezekiel. How do we process those into this idea of a hierarchy? Can the cherubim, seraphim, malakim, can any of them aspire to become watchers? I mean, I know this.
I can keep talking if you want me to.
I mean, that's a tough one. Go ahead. I mean, if you got something to say, because I don't know the answer to that. I'm just throwing that out there.
So the question is, again?
I mean, we've got some ontological differences between some of the members,
Right.
Yeah, like the cherubim, the seraphim are clearly different. The ophanim, if you want to include them, the wheels with eyes, but, clearly at least cherubim and seraphim, and the malakim, the angels that appear with the angel of Yahweh when they come to Abraham, they look just like men. So you've got at least 3 different types in the Old Testament, it seems. Possibly 4 if you include the ophanim. Can they aspire to be watchers? Can they aspire to become princes of nations? What kind of sons of God in Deuteronomy 32 were delegated the responsibility of becoming the gods of the nations?
Yeah, so again, I mean, they're called watchers, and that seems to me, again, that seems to be a function. What are they doing? They're watching over the nations. Their job was to watch over their particular nation, to lead it in justice and lead it supposedly towards the worship of Yahweh, which Psalm 82 says they didn't. So, but then we need to ask the question again about not just a malakim, which is an angel, the function of a messenger, but also a cherubim, which is the function of a guardian, or a seraphim. Is that a functional title, or is it an ontological title? To me, it's like, I don't really know. I guess thinking about Ezekiel, right? So he's describing these creatures in Isaiah too. They're describing these creatures that seem to be. I think I get where you're going with this, Derek. That they seem to be. They look different, right? Some have wings, some are more. They don't have wings. And so, can one species go into the realm of a watcher or something? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Well, yeah. I mean, if we've got these ontological differences here, and we're saying that watcher may be a job description, sort of like ha Satan, thus Satan.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that contrary to what we were taught in a flannel board Sunday school, there's a little red guy with horns and a tail and a pitchfork. It was a job title. So if watcher is a job title, could one of these clearly physically different forms, cherubim or seraphim, become a watcher? Or then we get
know.
into the New Testament context. Then we've got, powers, principalities, thrones, dominions. How do we parse that? I mean, do they all look like men? Do they look like, cherubim? I mean, is there a reason, for example, that in Mesopotamian iconography, that all of the gods had multiple sets of horns on their hats?
Yeah, horns were representative of deity.
Yeah.
And of power, which is, I think, relevant to this because rule and authority certainly goes along with the idea of horns. So it could be, that in the iconography, I mean, I don't know, that a horn doesn't necessarily mean that it has horns on its head. It's trying to convey some sort of a symbol of power. It could be that wings might be doing the same sort of a thing, or multiple heads, for example, the four living creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Do they really have four heads? Well, I think that that's actually a way of talking about it. And I mean, I don't know if I'm creating either or here or some sort of a logical fallacy, but when you have the four heads of the four living creatures, that very clearly is pointing to the four cardinal points of the zodiac, north, south, east, and west, and the Leo the lion and the man Aquarius, and so on and so forth. And so, is that really meant to be taken as an entity that has four heads, or is it meant to be some sort of a metaphor of the way that God has given us a universe, a physical universe that we look up into the sky and we see, okay, here's the way that God has set up the heavens. Here's got four cardinal points, and he's got the north, south, east, and the west, and he's got the 12 that are, main constellations that are around it. Well, all this imagery, especially in Isaiah 1 and Revelation 4 and 5, is a mirror in the invisible realm of what we see in the physical realm. And what I see in the physical realm, in terms of constellations and stuff, is they're four different things. And somehow, in the way that John is seeing the vision, he sees a creature with four heads on it. It's totally bizarre. I mean, is that really the way that it is over there? I don't know that it has to be that way, but maybe it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, the symbolism of it, Revelation is such a highly symbolic book. It makes sense of at least a both and, like you're saying, absolutely. And I do think that the cherubim are not always described the same way, too, in different passages. Right. They're not always described the same way. And as a matter of fact, too, that some believe that the cherubim, for example, in kingly thrones and stuff, are more like those sphinxes, and so there's even an argument that the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant were probably like those,
right,
rather than these Ezekiel beings, because the throne guardians, the way they're Ezekiel's describing them, there's clearly a symbolic component that is not just incidental. I'm agreeing with you, basically. And is it for us to in our modern world, we're obsessed with we are obsessed with ontology in the sense of and literalness and such, where we're reading this text and we need to discern, is this literally exactly how it was? Yes, it has to be. That's the general mindset that we tend to have. Whereas when you're reading literature of the ancient Near East, and particularly Hebrew literature, which is full of symbolism, they write about the actual historical events using symbols all over the place, when they're describing the events of the fall of kingdoms, you got the sky rolling up like a scroll, and the stars falling from the heavens and all this, and it's clearly talking about a historical event, but it's not saying this is symbolism or anything like that. It's describing it, but it's using those dramatic symbols to depict the spiritual reality that's going down. So this is a very common literary motif that Doug is talking about that does go throughout prophetic passages specifically, but all throughout the Old Testament. And so I think that there's a lot of merit in what you're saying with that. I do tend to see it that way, where it's probably more the meaning. I don't know, who knows what it literally looks like, but the literary text is full of meaning. And to me, it's what does this mean more than anything, not was this literally how it was? It's like, no, what does this mean? And when you see the symbolism elsewhere, you just naturally bring in those components, like you said, the 4 points of the compass. That's how they thought. That's how that kind of literature would be read and understood. Whereas today we're obsessed with, all these wings and everything like that. That's literally how the creatures are. I'm not sure it's that simplified,
Brian, as an artist, and somebody in Hollywood knows that whole realm and the way that artists think and the way that people are writing these movies and stuff today. I mean, do you think that we could have anything to learn from the people who are making art, that are making these movies with these fantastical creatures that maybe, we're watching it as literalists who want to see these, this is the way the superheroes, but maybe the people that are writing these stories, they're actually using the metaphors and the symbols, and they have meaning behind them that we're not even understanding. That's very significant for them.
Oh no,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the nature of storytelling on its most primal level. But yeah, where can I go? Well, let me say this. In my series, Chronicles of Nephilim and the Watchers and such, I'm retelling Bible stories, but I'm also integrating my imagination, and I'm using the sort of fantasy genre, so to speak, in what I write. Meaning, but it's not because I'm making up wizards and making up fanciful things that didn't really exist. No, what the fantasy genre, how I'm using it is, I'm showing this what we can't see and we don't know much about, the spiritual realm, but God says it's there and we just don't know much about it. So I'm using fantasy to create the creatures and the wild beings or whatever to communicate these theological messages, like Leviathan, that sea dragon of chaos. Was it really is it literally a dinosaur? What, modern Christians are like, that was really there. And it's like, no. Everyone wrote about Leviathan. And, they don't even talk about, there's no talk about now. This is only a symbol. They just incorporate it into everything they're talking about. Leviathan was there and God crushed the heads of Leviathan, So in other words, yes, there's an imagination, I think, that I think is loud and clear in some of the biblical texts, but we can't always discern the understanding of it. But I don't. On the one hand, there's a side of us, because of the influence of the Enlightenment, and we have all become children of our time, whether we like it or not, or even if we don't agree with it, we've been affected by it, and we do have that sense of science in the way we interpret everything. And so that's muddled our ability to appreciate it. And thus you have, these, idiot atheists, it's all myth and look at the fantasy. And they point out all these silly things in the Bible because they don't even know how to read literature. They're just reducing everything to materialism, and they have no imagination. So there is a side of our culture that has lost its imagination. But what you're indicating, Doug, is I agree with you, but there's another side of us where we haven't. And that will always be like this. We just create new forms of mythology to express our beliefs of meaningfulness. And so thus, yes, I see the Marvel universe, and we've talked about this before, as it is a natural impulse of religion making. Man is a religious creature, homo religious, right? And he must have a God. And it's not, and the atheistic materialistic sort of worldview and mythology is not satisfying in the long run. And the godless still need to create universes that bring this spiritual transcendent meaning through the use of gods. And that's clearly what superheroes are. And so in that sense, that is a good example of, now people can just say, we know it's fantasy, but we're just appreciating the good story and stuff. But that's not even the point. It's not there's even scholarship that argues the Greeks. Obviously, there may be some of the uneducated Greeks that did believe the Greek gods were real, right? But there was much of Greek culture where it wasn't about the gods being real. They knew they were expressing, it was their mythos way of expressing the reality of life that they're experiencing, that they don't necessarily have any other capacity to describe it, certainly not in the scientific terms of materialism that we do necessarily. But so the point was that, you don't have to be believing these gods are real, these superheroes are real, for it to be a real religious expression of your belief of what the universe is like. And so, yes. So that is much how modern man thinks. And rather than saying, well, that's godless man, no, that's man. Godless man creates his own gods, but godly men and women, when they are interacting with God and when God interacts with us, there's an imagination component to what they're doing. And if you believe that the inspiration of scriptures is God is like doing automatic dictation, or like magically moving the hands of the writers, that they're not really engaging their humanity, then you have a magical, superstitious view of biblical inspiration. That's not what the Bible says, and that's more like a Muslim view, where God dictates it to them. But that's clearly not what it is. But many Christians still fall under that, labor under that misapprehension. But when you understand that God's using us in our humanity, and the writers are engaging in their humanity, which involves their imagination, and thus it's not a question of like, well, what are they making up and what's fantasy and what's real? No, that's not it. It's what's the meaning of it all. And, maybe as you study things, you might discern, oh, well, this seems to be the historical event that they're talking about. But the language there is clearly, mythological. Like we've talked about this many times, the mythological connection of, even if you believe in that the fall of Lucifer is embedded in the Isaiah 13 chapter, that's not even important. What's important is when he's talking to the king of Babylon, he is referencing another pagan mythology, and he's mocking the god using that pagan mythology. In other words, the writers of the Bible are incorporating all this stuff that's around them, and which makes it, makes hermeneutics a complex issue. But maybe I hope I'm not confusing things more. But this is where the imagination does come in to interpreting these wild things. But I do think there's limits to what we should be careful to be aware of, where we're speculating beyond what the text is saying.
So let me explain why I wanted to go down this bunny trail, to get back to Derek's original question of whether or not a seraphim or a cherubim could become a watcher or something like that. The reason I did that is because, and you have to kind of be with just, this is where I'm at, and people disagree on this, but let's go to like Genesis 1 for a minute. And God making man in his own image. Let us make man in our image. That kind of like that duality. He's making us, but yet they're making us. It's kind of a weird thing, right? So if you take the watcher view, the sons of God view, that we're being made in the image of these other creatures that are in heaven that are ruling, okay? And that the image of God is really a function there, more than it is anything else. And we need intelligence, we need holiness, all this stuff in order to be in the image to carry it out. But it's a function, it's dominion. I mean, I really think that that's what Genesis 1 is telling us. And so if we are the analog of what's in heaven, okay, and we're made in the image of God here, and we're being made after the image of something else that's created in the heavenly realm, those would be the sons of God, because we're sons of God here, they're sons of God up there. If those sons of God then are the watchers, okay, then it seems to me that another kind of a creature, like a beastly kind of a creature, like a Rephaim, let's use that, because at least I think we can all handle that a Rephaim is not a watcher, it's a son of a watcher, And could a Rephaim in the other realm become a watcher? I would say the answer to that is no, because God has made a fixed number of heavenly sons of God, and that's what it is. Whether he punishes them, destroys them, whether they stay loyal or don't stay loyal, it's not like there's a moving category of, well, you're out, but this other kind of creature is now in because he really attained to it or something like that. I don't think that's what's going on any more than an ape, a gorilla could become a man and start carrying out dominion on the earth. And the reason I brought up the issue of, whether or not a seraphim really looks like that or a cherubim really looks like that is because if this is metaphor and describing to us some kind of picture, then maybe they don't have to look like that at all. And maybe they actually do look more like men. And so yes, the answer to that would be they could be, because we're not dealing with a different kind of species here. Like I said, we're dealing more with a function. And so I just really think that it's important for people to grasp that, look, there's either a seraphim and cherubim are different races of beings, or they are different functions that different races of beings could be carrying out. That makes sense. And depending on how you answer that question depends on the answer to Derek's question of whether or not they could, be vying for Top Gun in the Divine Council or something like that. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, and the other aspect of this that I think we need to consider is that when you're looking at reading those descriptions from Ezekiel and Isaiah, you have to realize that you're dealing with a human who's created to occupy a three-dimensional space, or 4 if you count time as a dimension.
Exactly.
Looking into a realm that may have many more dimensions. And so the human mind is trying to make sense of something that it was not designed to comprehend. So the description of the cherubim having 4 faces, I mean, which sounds really weird. How is that even possible? You got, 4 faces. Well, okay, we're trying to fit it into a 3-dimensional space, something that is occupying maybe 11 dimensions. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. And these are visions.
Josh, I was listening to Josh Peck on Blurry Creatures. He was using this exact analogy, Derek. He was talking about Flatlands. This whole book about this 2-dimensional world of lines and dots. And what happens if a 3rd-dimensional creature like us tries to come into that? If you were to stick your 3rd-dimensional foot onto the flatland, they would not recognize it as a foot. They would recognize it as a line.
Right.
How would you describe that? You have to describe it in your terms. So I think that's exactly right. What you're talking about.
Yeah.
So Judd, what is your opinion, the influence of the writings of other cultures in the ancient world? I think Christians kind of bristle when they get the idea that even though we can point to many examples, for example, in Isaiah 27:1, which we mentioned earlier, where he describes God crushing the heads of Leviathan, that fleeing serpent, that twisting serpent, where he's essentially quoting the Baal cycle, the Ugaritic myth of their king of the gods, Baal, who crushed, the heads of Yam, their chaos monster. And Isaiah quotes him. And so, Christians being told, well, the prophets quoted religious texts written by their pagan neighbors. And, Christians be like, whoa, that can't be in the Bible. Well, yeah, it is. Yahweh, the rider on the clouds, another reference to the Baal cycle. And there are other examples that we'd point to if we wanted to dig a little bit. How do we parse that then? If we're trying to understand the nature of the spirit realm, why would God then use the imagery that the pagans used to describe their gods, seeing as how these are false, fallen entities? Why would God even use that?
Well, for the first point that occurs to me is that one of our biggest hindrances in knowing the biblical world better is to, and this was sort of you referenced the felt board in Sunday school, training that all of us or most of us are privy to. It's almost as if the ancient Hebrews are we know that they lived in Israel, but they weren't really ancient Near Eastern peoples. They were something altogether different. I think that's problematic because you can't take the ancient Hebrews out of the ancient Near Eastern world because culturally they were ancient Near Eastern. That's why you find similar imagery in the Bible with other, their neighboring cultures. So that's really the first jumping off point, I think, that people, we should be comfortable with, but we're fighting against things like the lack of biblical literacy and the downturn of biblical literacy. But I think that that's a step towards better understanding why there are references to these neighboring ancient literatures that the Hebrews writers and prophets would utilize, because it was an imagery and a language that the Hebrew people would have understood because they encountered it on a daily basis. And by way of analogy, one of the things that I talk about in terms of holidays that we celebrate now that some people think are just altogether useless and pagan, like Halloween or Christmas and Easter. Since we just passed Easter in particular, but things like Christmas and Easter. Yes, there were pagans that utilized that time as well, but who created time in the first place? Who created space in the first place? It was Yahweh. That's all God's. It was all His to begin with. So by way of analogy, the imagery that's utilized in the Bible was God's to begin with. I mean, we're through the lens of the Bible, looking at these neighboring ancient literatures and culture to the ancient Hebrews. We're getting a kind of we're getting almost a perspective that God has on. Well, it really is a perspective that God has on what these fallen entities are, what their natures are. And as Brian pointed out, you can't divorce that from the symbolism and the idiom of the language and the nuance that would have been understood in that world. And that's another challenge that presents itself in the study of these kinds of things, for everybody from the layman to the scholar. So I think that at the end of the day, we have to remember that we can't remove the ancient Hebrews from this world, and that helps us understand the kind of imagery and references that you pointed out, Derek, to these neighboring mythologies and cultures.
So God took the Hebrews right where they were and didn't say, now, before I explain this next part to you, I've got to disabuse you of some of the notions you might have picked up from the Canaanites.
Yeah, right. Well, this is really important because this is obviously this is an important hermeneutical issue that all of us have been driven by, and understanding it's changed us in the ability to interact with the pagan surrounding cultures, right? And to utilize that knowledge as a means of understanding the Bible more clearly. And I've been getting a lot more. I've seen critique of our viewpoint. I've even heard it in relation to Michael Heiser, because he's the one that has the sort of the scholarly, standard that people would take more seriously to try to debunk. And the big arguments that they bring up basically tend to be sort of like, well, yeah, that view is you're exegeting paganism, not the Bible. And the Bible, one of the hermeneutical principles is let Scripture interpret Scripture, which is a priority in interpretation, sure. But what they mean by that is when we go outside of the Bible, say, well, look, there are watchers in other texts. There are these kinds of beings or this kind of language in these other texts, and they say, such as sons of God, right? Where they make the argument that sons of God are just human beings. So for you to draw from outside the Bible as part of your argument of what sons of God mean, it's a common notion, right? Then that's illegitimate. But the problem is, there's all kinds of problems with that. But But I think one of the biggest things for those very people who tend to feel like you can only interpret the Bible from within other Bible texts and you can't make any references to outside of the Bible text for understanding. And these aren't just ignorant fundamentalist types. These are, Reformed scholars. I've seen, very intelligent, and even people I respect. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're making this argument. And I understand where it's coming from. They're afraid of the corruption of paganism, syncretism, right? But like, to me, it's like one of the things I like to explain is like, do you know anything about Bible translation? I mean, there's so many words, including watcher, right? That they're not even sure what they mean in the Bible. And it's drawn from cognate languages like Ugaritic and Aramaic. And it's like, the English text you're reading is actually only able to be understood translated into English, because you're referencing other pagan languages that have whole word systems and meanings that they're drawing from. So even the act of translating into English is doing the very thing that you say we shouldn't do. So you can't even read your English Bible by your own standard, And that's important. I mean, that's an important thing to understand, because it was the thing I feared when I first started down this road. I'm like, I felt like, oh, is this syncretism, But when you understand the difference, the ability to discern and to say, like what we've all been talking about, that there's I like to use the subversion notion of, you're using common images and common concepts, et cetera, but you are capturing the language and you're reinterpreting it for your own purposes and your own meaning. And what's interesting is that's why the left is so powerful in America in terms of controlling and destroying America, because they believe language creates reality. Now, I don't believe language creates it, but it does. Language guides and restricts our knowledge, and so our knowledge of reality. So it is deeply influential on reality, on our understanding of reality, right? So the left says, well, that's why the left is always changing language and saying, oh no, you can't say that now, and now you must say pronouns, and now you can't say this word. What they're doing is they are taking control of reality in their view. And they're creating reality by controlling the language. And there's some truth to that, is what I'm saying. But that's the point, is they're taking meanings like they've taken words like queer. Queer used to be, decades ago, it was just another word, a derogatory term for homosexuals. But now queer is a positive, power term of empowerment, right? Because they took it and they changed the meaning of it. And that's why they're very effective. And all that to say that's what the Bible's doing as well. And that's why I'm not afraid of Easter and Christmas. And again, I think we've talked about this already, before, but it's like, no, you take control and you turn the meanings, you change the meanings into what you need them to be. And and that's how you influence culture for sure. But
no, it's a really good point.
It makes our discussion about hierarchy a little bit more difficult, though, doesn't it? Because we don't know exactly what it is that we're talking about on the other side of this veil,
Yeah.
Because we're having to use these very images and pictures of all these different cultures, and that the Bible's imploring and when should we read it as literal of some sort of a spiritual creature, and when should we not? And it just makes it a tough conversation.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is the word malakim in Hebrew, which means messenger, and that denotes just the very lowest tier of the angelic realm, if you will. But in the cultures, Semitic cultures around ancient Israel, Ugarit, Ebla for another, which was a city in northern Syria that was very powerful in the 3rd millennium BC down through about the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The malakim were underworld deities who were sort of related to the Rephaim. So, that the word is essentially the same. It's a cognate, but the perception of what they represented was different. They were underworld spirits rather than just messenger angels. So, words matter, language matters, and how it's employed. And We're about an hour into this program, and to keep these manageable lengths, I don't want to stretch us out any further, but I do want to point out that we still have yet to address the New Testament terms, the Greek terms like dominion, dynamis or powers, the elemental spirits, the stoicheia, the exousia, the authorities or powers. Do we want to address that in the next session? Or do we just want to throw up our hands and say, got no clue?
Well, look,
I say let's do a New Testament. Maybe even drag in some early church literature. I say let's go for it.
Okay, all right. Because we get some very interesting things there too. Because we get the references in Jude and 2 Peter to the glorious ones who are blasphemed against. That could be an interesting speculation. Of course, we get the cosmocrators, only mentioned once, the world rulers or cosmic powers of Ephesians 6:12, and then you get those elemental spirits that Paul mentions once in passing. So what are they? So we can I don't have any doubt that we can probably do an hour on that in our next session. Any closing thoughts that you want to leave to kind of put a bow on things? Because I'm out of material at this point, but anyone who wants to speak up here to put a wrap on this, the floor is yours.
I mean, just, yeah, go ahead, Judd.
I was going to say, I think we've all pointed out to one degree or another the challenges and problems to addressing the meeting out and the fleshing out of a hierarchy. But it's still worthwhile. It's still a worthwhile pursuit, both from just studying the Bible sort of life application perspective, but also for scholars, because there's, as we've all pointed out here, let's just take on the basis of language alone, there's still lots of unanswered questions, and it's only by using things like historical linguistics and comparative linguistics that we're going to be able to really get a clearer picture of that. So who knows? Maybe some epigraph is waiting in some unexpected site that's going to answer some of these questions that we posed tonight.
Well put.
Yeah, I was just kind of going to say that the whole idea of a hierarchy in the other world, and maybe the way that I started off with, it's important for us to understand that there's a host of heaven. It's not just one or two kinds of creatures, the whole host. And that if God is making things down here as an analog to the way he makes them up there, then there's bureaucracy and there's government and there is positions of authority, and they follow rules just like we do. And I think that's important for people to at least begin to wrap their minds around.
Yeah.
It isn't just angels fighting demons and that's it. Yeah. Or in some people's minds, just Satan or something like that. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on there, and we actually do have some information about it.
Yeah.
That I have found to be very helpful in trying to understand the world that's going on around me.
Well, as Tim Alberino has pointed out in his book, Birthright, you've got, we know that in the spirit realm, you've got books. There are books that are referenced, is your name not written in the book of life or what have you. But, God tells Job, the sons of God, the stars sang, when he created the earth. So apparently, okay, they've got literature, they can write, they've got a language, and they've also got music, they can sing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot more going on in that realm than we're aware of, because they apparently, as you say, they've got a hierarchy, they've got culture, they've got rules, and some kind of organization, even if we don't perceive it well, because as Paul wrote, we're looking into a mirror, into a darkened room, so we don't get it. But look forward to continuing this discussion next month as we try to peer into that room and try to make out the form of some of the shapes moving behind us. Doug Van Dorn, author of Giant Sons of the Gods, the 10th Anniversary Expanded and Revised Edition, now available. He's also the co-author of The Angel of the Lord, a biblical, historical, and theological study. Brian Godawa, best-selling author, award-winning screenwriter. His nonfiction work includes When Giants Were Upon the Earth, When Watchers Ruled the Nations, God Against the Gods, and more. And Dr. Judd Burton, the founder and director of the Institute of Biblical Anthropology. I always enjoyed these conversations, fellows. Look forward to doing this again next month.
Thanks for having me.
Check the show notes below this program wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast, whether it's YouTube, youtube.com/GilbertHouse, our app, which is really the best place to do it, gilberthouse.org/app. If you don't have it yet, you'll find links to the websites of our esteemed guests, Pastor Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, and Brian Godawa. And we will all be back again next month, God willing, for another episode of Iron and Myth. Straight ahead, special announcement regarding the Gilbert House Ministries 2024 tour of Israel, and news about Skywatch TV's new virtual conference, One World Rising, and another edition of Bless Their Pointy Little Heads, straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Thousands of years ago, giants walked the earth. They are long gone, but their spirits remain. The evidence is there for those with eyes to see. Megalithic tombs, monuments aligned with the stars, and the words of the prophets and apostles recorded in Scripture. Now, see this evidence for yourself as Derek and Sharon Gilbert take you on a tour of the Holy Land with special guests Pastor Carl Gallups and Messianic Rabbi Zev Porad. From the mountain where the story began to the mountain where it all ends. Wars of the Gods, Volume 2, Search for the Rephaim. Available now in DVD and HD streaming video. Online at gilberthouse.org. Talking the Walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net. That is our global hub. You can also find us at gilberthouse.org. That is sort of the web hub for everything that Sharon and I do. On social media, it's at View from Bunker, or my personal Twitter account at Derek Gilbert, and that's DEREK, by the way. Facebook, View from the Bunker, and you can also find us at Truth Social, Gab Me, We Get Her Parlor, at Derek P. Gilbert. Well, you by now have heard how Anheuser-Busch has inadvertently attempted to kill the Bud Light brand. This was not an intentional thing, apparently, but the new marketing vice president for Bud Light, which is, at least as of this recording, still the number one beer in America, but that is a status that we don't know how long it will hold, because it has really taken a hit in recent days because of its decision to promote a young man, 26-year-old Dylan Mulvaney, who is proudly proclaiming that he's been living for as a girl, for 1 year. Now, I don't want to mock Dylan Mulvaney because he is a symptom of what's happening in our society. And this, the bigger picture issue here is that the ancient spirit known to the Sumerians as Inanna, to the Babylonians and Akkadians as Ishtar, to the Canaanites as Astarte, to the Greeks as Aphrodite, the Romans as Venus, and by many different names through many different cultures throughout history, even to some as Queen of Heaven in the Bible and even in the modern era, sadly. She is, you could make a very strong case that she is the spirit of the age, because her followers 5,000 years ago were cross-dressing. You could even say transgender, because there are ancient Sumerian hymns that praise Inanna for being able to change men into women and women into men. And sometimes she decided to manifest as a man rather than as a woman, which is why she was the god/deess of mindless, bloody violence and sex. Not love, but just wanton carnality. And that was her thing back in the day. And if you look around the world today, you can say, well, sex and violence, that pretty much sums up Western civilization in the modern age. I want what I want right now, and if I don't get it, I'm going to start smashing things. Well, Dylan Mulvaney has managed to attract enough of a following that he has put about $1.5 million in the bank with endorsements, not just from Bud Light, but also Kate Spade, a line of women's wear, Nike, which has got women's athletic wear now. For some reason, the marketing team at Nike thinks it will sell more sports bras by having them modeled by a skinny young man. And again, this is not to make fun of Dylan Mulvaney. He, in my eyes, is a young man who's in a lot of pain, and he's figured out a way to monetize his internal struggles. And sadly, there are those who are more than happy to endorse those struggles. What he doesn't realize is that a day is coming when he will no longer be the flavor of the minute and he will be cast aside. Now, we've seen some rather over-the-top responses from conservatives who are not impressed with the Bud Light endorsement. For example, Kid Rock took several cases of Anheuser-Busch products and promptly shot them up with his rifle. Made for good clickbait, but it really doesn't help the situation and certainly feeds the narrative that transgender individuals are being fed that the rest of us want to kill them, to literally commit genocide against them, which is not true. But it may have some explanation, some explanatory power behind people who are suffering from gender dysphoria, taking out their anger, their rage, and their pain on other people. Case in point, the murder of 6 individuals at the Christian school in Nashville recently. This, sadly, is an agenda that is much bigger than Dylan Mulvaney, and it is going to continue because of a new social credit score that is being used to grade America's largest corporations. It is called CEI, the Corporate Equality Index, and CEI is overseen by the Human Rights Campaign, which is the world's largest LGBTQ plus political lobbying group. This was launched back in 2002, but it has really picked up momentum here in recent years because it is a small subset of the larger DEI, or rather ESG, investment strategy, which is environment, social governance, or governance. Anyway, it's basically a way of trying to enforce a certain type of corporate responsibility on America's largest corporations. Environmental, social, and corporate governance. That's what ESG stands for. And that is being pushed by the world's largest investment banks like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street Bank. Now, if you're wondering why corporations are ignoring the truth, the observable truth of the mantra, get woke, go broke, it's because of ESG and the fact that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street Bank, who are pushing these guidelines, are among the largest shareholders in America's largest corporations, including Nike, Anheuser-Busch, and Kate Spade, all sponsors of Dylan Mulvaney. So as long as these very large shareholders in these corporations are promoting ESG scores, a subset of which is this new CEI, Corporate Equality Index, you will see corporate boards making decisions to please Vanguard, State Street Bank, and BlackRock rather than their shareholders and their customers. Now, we've already seen over the last week and a half, 2 weeks since this news broke, which broke on April 1st, by the way, which is why some of us at first thought that the Bud Light sponsorship was an April Fool's joke. It sadly was not. But Anheuser-Busch as a corporation has lost about $6 billion in market cap since then. It will probably recover as this kerfluffle eventually fades away in the memory of customers. But this is the kind of marketing mistake that can really damage a brand for a long, long time. And it certainly is within the right of people, like Kid Rock, to do what he did. But just remember, these people who are being used, like Dylan Mulvaney, who, whether he realizes it or not, is just a pawn in a much bigger spiritual game. I mean, remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. He will find himself on the scrap heap of history before too long. And unless there are Christians who are willing to open their arms to him and say, you know what? You're welcome in our congregation. We will share with you the love of Jesus Christ. And we'll also explain to you why, lovingly, Jesus Christ, from the beginning, created he them male and female. But we're willing to love you, listen to you, and find out the root cause of your outward display. And to be quite honest, Dylan Mulvaney's caricature of women, of womanhood, is a mockery of what womanhood is about. He's not in a place right now, I don't think, where he will listen to that or hear it. Certainly not while he's banking $1.5 million a year in corporate sponsorships. But again, there's a bigger game at work here. And the principalities and powers behind the scenes are using people like Dylan Mulvaney as human shields in this spiritual war. So while Dylan Mulvaney is laughing all the way to the bank, all we can say is, bless his pointy little head. Got a couple of events to tell you about. Skywatch TV's next virtual conference is now live. You can access it instantly at defenderconference.com. It's called One World Rising. My presentation deals with the World Economic Forum and its Build Back Better campaign, the Great Reset Initiative. I explain why it should actually be titled Build Back Babel, because that's more accurate. And really what they're trying to do is turn the clock back about 5,000 years. Other presenters include Dr. Tom Horn, of course, Pastor Carl Gallups, Ryan Pitterson, Dr. Judd Burton, who you just saw in this program, Troy Anderson, Colonel David Giamona, Zach Drew, Dr. Mike Spalding, Dr. Igal Gurman, Kenny C., Vicky Joy Anderson, and more. In fact, all of those people I just mentioned have all been guests on A View from the Bunker. Now, with Tom Horn's case, it's been quite some time, but you go back far enough in the archives and you'll find them there. Anyway, you can find out more online. Not only do you get access to more than 24 hours worth of new video content, you get access to all 6 Skywatch Films full-length feature documentaries. It is well worth the information, well worth the cost, and you find out more online and register. Get instant access for 90 days. Watch in the order you choose to watch at defenderconference.com, defenderconference.com. Coming up in less than 2 months, Sharon and I are going to be back at His Call Ministries. We're doing another weekend workshop. This will be June 9th through 11th of 2023 at the Midwest Regional Apostolic Center. The Glory Barn, they're calling it. It has been under construction for a while. This is in Sparta, Missouri at the Finley River Ranch. His Call Ministries, Alec and Ginny Wade, wonderful people. They've treated us like family both times we've been there. They've hosted the women of Skywatch TV for a couple of women's conferences since then, and they also have just been extremely well received. This is kind of an intimate gathering. They've got space for about 100. So if you're interested, get in touch with His Call Ministries right away and reserve your spot. HisCallMinistries.com. Again, we'll be there June 9th through 11th of 2023. And more information and registration at HisCallMinistries.com. We'll be out in the Dayton, Ohio area, Brookline, Ohio, that is, for the Go Therefore Conference the last weekend in July 28th through 30th of 2023. And I didn't update my my little notes here as to who the speakers were, but the speakers list for the Go Therefore Conference this year is really, really remarkable. We will be there along with, and it's in PDF format as I'm bringing it up, but here we go. Coach Dave Daubenmeyer, Kenny C., Pastor Casper McLeod, Vicky Joy Anderson, L.A. Marzulli, Thomas Dunn, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Greg Reed, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, David Hevner, and, of course, Dr. Mike Spalding, the coordinator of the conference. You can find out more at GoThereforeConference.com. It's a great facility for the conference. Don't miss it. GoThereforeConference.com, July 28th through 30th of 2023. Skywatch TV's tour of Turkey, October 18th through November 3rd. Those dates probably going to have to be pushed back a year. We're still waiting on confirmation from the travel company. If you're interested, you can find out more at our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. But because of the way the infrastructure was smashed, it's not likely we will be out there this fall, but we will let you know about that as soon as we can. And our tour of Israel, the Gilbert House Ministries Israel Tour 2024, March 31st through April 9th of 2024, with an optional 3-day extension to Jordan. And our special guest next year, Timothy Alberino. He was gracious enough to have us accompany him for the True Legends tour of Sardinia, the tombs of the giants, back in 2018. We're now returning the favor in 2024 to bring him along with us to Israel. We will see sites that most tours do not visit, such as Gilgal Rephaim. We plan to visit the Shamir Dolmen in 2024. This is the big daddy of dolmens in Israel. It's got a 50-ton capstone. The tabletop stone on this dolmen, estimated at 50 tons. We checked it out early in our most recent tour, went a few days ahead of the tour and found that, yes, it is accessible for tour groups. So we are planning to put that on the tour for next year. And of course, we'll see the places you want to see. Caesarea Philippi, the base of Mount Hermon, the city of Jerusalem, the old city, the Temple Mount, God willing. We were able to get up there again this year, which is just an incredible thing to be right there on the Har Moed, the Mount of Assembly, which is where Armageddon will be fought, or at least that is the prize that the opposing armies will be fighting for. Find out more and reserve your spot for our 2024 Israel tour. You can find us at gilbertsinisrael.com. Easy to remember, gilbertsinisrael.com, and we pray we see you in the Holy Land in 2024. If you get a spare moment, we appreciate always if you take a moment to leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And of course, you can give us a thumbs up, a like at our Facebook page at View from the Bunker on Facebook. Our announcer is DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.